One might think the birth of a nation is all about grand declarations, fierce battles, and the raising of a new flag, and while Belgium certainly had all of that in 1830, there's a much smaller, yet equally fascinating part of the story that often gets overlooked. I'm talking about the humble coin. Once the dust of revolution had settled and the Kingdom of Belgium was officially on the map, the next order of business was, quite literally, business. A country needs its own money, a tangible symbol of its newfound sovereignty that people can jingle in their pockets. So in 1832, the very first Belgian coins began to roll out of the mint, and among them were the foundational copper centimes. These first copper pieces were essential. They weren't the flashy gold or silver coins for the wealthy, but the everyday currency for the common person. They were the coins you'd use to buy a loaf of bread, a glass of beer, or a newspaper, hot off the press. The denominations were simple: 1, 2, 5, and 10 centimes. This was the small change that powered the Belgian economy from the ground up. The decision to use copper was a practical one. It was durable, relatively inexpensive, and had a long history of being used for low-value currency across Europe. It was the perfect metal to establish a stable and trustworthy monetary system for the brand new kingdom. The task of creating this new coinage fell to the Brussels Mint, which had the monumental job of designing and producing millions of coins that would not only be functional, but also carry the identity of the new state. It was a statement to the world, and especially to their former Dutch rulers, that Belgium was here to stay. Each coin was a tiny metal canvas, a piece of propaganda that would pass through the hands of every single citizen. It had to communicate strength, legitimacy, and unity. The choices made in those early days would set the standard for Belgian coinage for over a century to come, creating a legacy in copper. Think about it. For the first time, people were holding a piece of Belgium in their hands. It wasn't a proclamation read from a distant balcony or a politician's promise. It was real, it was solid, and it was theirs. These copper centimes were more than just a means of exchange. They were a daily reminder of independence. They represented a break from the past and the beginning of a new chapter. The journey of these little copper discs, from their inception in 1832 to their eventual replacement, tells a story not just of economics, but of a nation finding its feet, defining its identity, and weathering the storms of history. Now, if you're going to design a coin for a new country, you need some powerful symbols. You can't just stamp it with a picture of a turnip, can you? The Belgians understood this perfectly. For their first copper coins, they chose symbols that were steeped in history and brimming with meaning. The star of the show was, without a doubt, the Belgian lion. This wasn't just any old lion. This was the Leo Belgicus, a heraldic beast that had represented the Low Countries for centuries. By placing this magnificent, defiant lion on the reverse of the coin, often shown with its paw resting on a tablet inscribed with Constitution, Belgium was making a bold statement about its commitment to law and liberty. On the other side of the coin, the obverse, was the monogram of the new king, Leopold I. His intertwined L was a mark of royal authority, linking the new state directly to its monarch. Surrounding the monogram was the king's title, Leopold Premier, Roi des Belges, Leopold I, King of the Belgians. This phrasing was terribly important. He wasn't the King of Belgium, a title that might suggest ownership of the land, but the King of the Belgians, a monarch who reigned by the will of his people. It was a subtle but crucial distinction that underlined the constitutional nature of the new monarchy, a concept quite revolutionary for its time. And then, there was the motto, a phrase that would become synonymous with the country itself. L'union fait la force. In English, unity makes strength. This wasn't just a catchy slogan, it was the very principle upon which Belgium was founded. The nation was a union of different provinces, with people speaking different languages, who had come together to achieve independence. Stamping this motto on every single coin was a constant, gentle reminder to every citizen that their strength lay in their solidarity. It was a message of hope and a call to cohesion, carried in the pocket of every Belgian. The man behind these iconic designs was Joseph Pierre Bremt, the engraver general of the Brussels Mint. Bremt was a master of his craft, and his work set an incredibly high standard for all Belgian coinage that followed. His designs were elegant, clear, and perfectly balanced. He managed to pack an immense amount of national identity onto a tiny copper disc without it ever feeling cluttered. The lion was majestic, the lettering was crisp, and the overall effect was one of quiet confidence. Bramp's artistry ensured that these first Belgian coins were not just functional objects, but miniature works of art that beautifully encapsulated the spirit of 1830. Creating a coin is a bit like baking, only with a lot more hammering and a distinct lack of flour. The physical characteristics of these early Belgian copper coins were just as important as their designs. The 10-centime piece, for example, was a rather chunky fellow, weighing a solid 20 grams and measuring 32 millimeters across. The 5 centimes was a more modest 10 grams. This substantial size and weight were deliberate. In an era when the intrinsic value of the metal was still a consideration, a heavy coin felt more trustworthy. It gave a satisfying clunk when placed on a counter, reassuring both the buyer and the seller that this was real, proper money. The minting process itself was a fascinating blend of art and industrial might. It began with Bramp's master engravings, which were used to create dies. These dies, made of hardened steel, were the stamps that would strike the designs onto blank copper discs, known as planchets. The immense pressure of the coin press would force the soft copper to flow into every tiny detail of the die, instantly creating the lion, the monogram, and the lettering. Early minting wasn't always perfect, and this is where things get interesting for collectors. You might find coins with slight variations, off-center strikes, or tiny flaws that give each one a unique character. One of the more subtle features of these coins was the rim. Some of the very first coins had a plain, smooth edge. However, the mint quickly began to experiment with different rim styles to make the coins more difficult to counterfeit and to reduce wear. You might find coins with reeded edges, meaning they have fine vertical grooves, or with lettering inscribed along the edge. These details, often overlooked by the casual observer, were an important part of the coin's security and durability. The choice of rim could also vary between denominations, adding another layer of complexity to the family of copper coinage. The copper itself was sourced to be as pure as possible, typically around 95 to 97%. This purity gave the coins a lovely reddish-brown luster when they were new, which would slowly mellow over time into the rich, dark patina we associate with old copper. However, the quality of the metal could sometimes vary from one batch to the next, leading to slight differences in color and tone. These early years were a period of learning and refinement for the Brussels Mint as it perfected its techniques. Each coin that survived is a tiny artifact of this industrial and economic genesis, a testament to the skill and precision required to turn a simple piece of copper into a symbol of a nation. For several decades, pure copper reigned supreme as the metal of choice for Belgium's small change currency. It was reliable, familiar, and did the job splendidly. However, as the 19th century progressed, the world of metallurgy was advancing at a remarkable pace. New discoveries and industrial processes were making it possible to create metal alloys with superior properties. By the 1860s, mints across Europe were beginning to look for alternatives to pure copper. While wonderfully traditional, copper was also quite soft, meaning coins wore down relatively quickly in circulation. Their beautiful designs could become smooth and illegible after years of passing from hand to hand. The solution came in the form of a shiny new alloy copper-nickel. This mixture, typically composed of about 75% copper and 25% nickel, was a game changer. It was significantly harder and more resistant to wear and tear than pure copper. This meant that the intricate designs, the royal monograms, and the proud Belgian lion would remain sharp and clear for much longer. Furthermore, copper-nickel had a silvery white appearance that was quite distinct from the reddish-brown of copper, which helped to prevent confusion between different denominations. It looked clean, modern, and efficient, perfect for a nation that prided itself on its industrial prowess. Belgium officially made the switch in 1861 under the reign of Leopold I. The old heavy copper 5 and 10 centime pieces were gradually replaced by smaller, lighter coins made of this new copper-nickel alloy. The public quickly adapted to these new coins. They were more convenient to carry around, and their durability meant they stayed in better condition. This transition marked a significant moment in the evolution of coinage. It represented a move away from the traditional idea that a coin's value was tied to its metal content, and towards the modern concept of fiat currency, where a coin's value is guaranteed by the state that issues it. This shift wasn't just a technical upgrade, it reflected broader economic and technological trends. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing, and efficiency was the order of the day. A coin that lasted longer in circulation was simply more economical for the government to produce. The move to copper-nickel was a practical, forward-thinking decision that aligned Belgium with the most advanced minting practices of the era. The age of pure copper for everyday pocket change was beginning to draw to a close, replaced by the resilience and practicality of modern alloys. The humble centime was evolving with the times. When Belgium was founded, French was the sole official language of government and administration, and, well, this was definitely reflected in the coinage. All the inscriptions, from the king's title to the national motto, were exclusively in French. However, this didn't fully represent the linguistic reality of the country, where a significant portion of the population, particularly in the northern region of Flanders, spoke Dutch. As the 19th century wore on, the Flemish movement gained momentum, advocating for the equal status of the Dutch language in public life. This cultural and political shift would eventually find its way onto the nation's currency. The change began under the reign of Leopold II, who succeeded his father in 1865. The pressure to recognize Dutch as an official language was really growing, and in 1886, a landmark decision was made. For the first time, Belgium would issue coins with bilingual inscriptions. This was, honestly, a hugely significant step. The new coins featured the king's title and the country's name in both languages. On one version of the coin, you would see the French Leopold II, Roi des Belges, and on another, the Dutch Leopold II's Koning der Belgen. The mint produced roughly equal numbers of each, ensuring that both linguistic communities were represented. This practice of issuing separate coins for each language continued for several decades. It was a slightly cumbersome but politically necessary solution. However, as the 20th century dawned, a more integrated approach was sought. Why have two separate coin types when you could have one that embraced both languages? And so, coins began to appear with both French and Dutch legends on the same piece. The country name might appear as Belgique, Belgie, and the motto would eventually be shown in both its forms. This evolution from monolingual to dual-language coins is a fascinating monetary map of Belgium's journey towards linguistic equality. The designs also changed with the monarchs. After Leopold II, King Albert I came to the throne, and his portrait or monogram graced the coins. Then came Leopold III, and later Baudouin. Each new reign brought a new face and a new style to the currency, but the commitment to bilingualism remained a constant feature. The coins became a small but powerful symbol of the country's complex identity. They acknowledged the diversity within the nation while still being bound together by the unifying symbols of the monarch, the lion, and the shared history they represented. The copper and copper alloy coins were no longer just speaking one language, they were speaking for all Belgians. The outbreak of the First World War in 1914 brought unimaginable devastation to Belgium. The country was invaded and occupied, and its economy was thrown into turmoil. This crisis had a dramatic and immediate impact on its coinage. Metals like copper and nickel were suddenly vital, strategic materials, needed for shell casings, wiring, and other military hardware. The German occupying forces quickly began to confiscate existing coins for their metal content, and the normal operations of the Brussels Mint ground to a halt. The familiar copper and copper-nickel centimes vanished from circulation almost overnight, creating a severe shortage of small change. In the face of this monetary vacuum, a fascinating phenomenon occurred: the rise of necessity money. Local municipalities, businesses, and even prisoner-of-war camps began to issue their own makeshift currency to keep local economies functioning. These were often printed on cardboard or paper, but many towns managed to produce metallic tokens. Lacking access to copper and nickel, they turned to whatever they could find. Zinc and iron became the new metals of money. These coins were crudely struck with simple designs, and were never intended to be permanent. They were a temporary solution born of desperation. The coins produced during the German occupation tell a grim story. The occupying authorities also issued their own zinc coinage for use in Belgium. These coins were distinctly different from the pre-war Belgian issues. They were lightweight, prone to corrosion, and felt cheap and unsubstantial. The designs were stark and utilitarian, completely lacking the artistic flair of the old Belgian centimes. Gone was the proud Belgian lion. In its place were simple inscriptions and the denomination. For the Belgian people, being forced to use these dull gray zinc coins was a daily reminder of their subjugation. When the war finally ended in 1918 and Belgium was liberated, the country faced the enormous task of rebuilding its economy and its monetary system. The first priority was to get rid of the German-issued zinc coins and the various local necessity tokens. The Brussels Mint resumed production, but the economic situation was dire. The war had been incredibly expensive, and the value of the Belgian franc had fallen. New coins were issued, but they were often still made of cheaper metals like zinc, as copper and nickel remained scarce and costly. The war had left a permanent scar on Belgian coinage, marking a definitive end to the era of high-quality, heavy copper alloy coins for everyday use. In the years following the Great War, Belgium, like much of Europe, struggled with economic instability. The pre-war certainties were gone, and this was reflected in the nation's currency. Pure copper coins had long been phased out, and now even the hardy copper-nickel alloys were becoming a luxury for low-value denominations. The 1920s and 30s were a period of intense experimentation with different metals and alloys as the mint tried to find a balance between durability, cost, and public acceptance. The coins of this era tell a story of a nation trying to get back on its feet in a changed world. The familiar 5 and 10 centime copper-nickel coins were eventually replaced by coins with a hole in the middle. This was a clever way to make them easily distinguishable from other denominations, while also saving a small amount of metal on each coin produced. Over millions of coins, this small saving added up. Metals like nickel, brass, and bronze, which is an alloy of copper and tin, were used. These alloys still contained a significant amount of copper, giving them a familiar color and feel, but the composition was constantly being tweaked to reduce costs. The era of a stable, unchanging metallic standard was well and truly over. Then came the Second World War, and history repeated itself but with even greater severity. Once again, Belgium was occupied, and once again, metals like copper and nickel were commandeered for the war effort. The coinage was debased even further, with zinc becoming the standard metal for almost all circulating coins. These World War II-era zinc coins were even more austere than their 1914 to 1918 counterparts. They were poorly made, corroded very quickly, and felt almost worthless. They are a stark metallic reminder of the hardship and scarcity of the occupation years, a period when the very concept of a stable currency seemed to fall apart. After 1945, as Belgium began its post-war recovery, there was a concerted effort to restore confidence in the currency. The awful zinc coins were withdrawn as quickly as possible. The mint returned to producing coins in bronze for the smaller denominations, like the 20 and 50 centime pieces. This brought copper back into the pockets of the Belgian people, and the warm reddish glow of the bronze coins was a welcome sight. It symbolized a return to normalcy and stability. However, inflation meant that these low-value coins were becoming less and less useful. The days of the centime itself were numbered, and with it, the long tradition of copper-based coins in daily circulation. As the 20th century drew to a close, a monetary revolution of a different kind was on the horizon. The nations of Europe were preparing for their most ambitious economic project ever, the introduction of a single currency, the euro. For Belgium, this meant that its beloved franc, which had served the nation for over 170 years, was about to be retired. And with the franc, the entire lineage of coins, from the first chunky coppers of Leopold I to the modern bronze and nickel pieces, become a thing of the past. The countdown to 2002 marked the final chapter in the long and fascinating story of Belgian national coinage. In the final decades of the franc, copper's role had already diminished significantly. While the 50 centime coin was made of bronze, the most common low-value coin, the 1 franc piece, was made of copper-nickel. Inflation had rendered the smaller centime denominations obsolete long before. The last coins minted in the name of the Belgian franc were therefore the final descendants of that tradition started in 1832. They still carried the portrait of the monarch, King Albert II, and the name of the country in its 2 main languages, but they were destined to have a very short life in circulation before the great changeover. With the arrival of the euro on the 1st of January, 2002, a whole new family of coins was introduced. Interestingly, copper didn't disappear entirely, it just changed its form. The new 1, 2, and 5 Eurocent coins have a distinct copper color, but it's something of an illusion. They are actually made of a steel core, plated with a thin layer of copper. This makes them much cheaper to produce than solid bronze or copper coins, while still giving them a traditional appearance that helps people distinguish them from the other coins. It's a clever piece of modern minting, but it's a world away from the solid, pure copper centimes of the 1830s. The transition was remarkably swift. For a few weeks, both francs and euros were used side by side, leading to a bit of confusion and a lot of pocket jingling. But soon enough, the franc was withdrawn completely. Belgians were encouraged to return their old coins to banks, and vast quantities of historic currency were gathered up and melted down. A few were saved in jars and drawers as souvenirs, but for all intents and purposes, the Belgian copper coin, in its many forms and alloys, had ceased to be money. Its long and storied journey as a medium of exchange was officially over, and it passed into the realm of history. So, what becomes of old money? Does it simply vanish, melted down and forgotten? Thankfully, no. For collectors, numismatists, and history enthusiasts, these old Belgian copper coins are not just obsolete currency, they are miniature time capsules. Each coin tells a story, not just about the monarch on its face or the year it was struck, but about the era it came from. Holding a heavy 10-centime piece from 1833 is like shaking hands with the 19th century. You can almost feel the history, the optimism of a young nation, and the clatter of horse-drawn carts on cobblestone streets. It is a tangible link to a world that is long gone. The appeal for collectors lies in the details and the variations. They hunt for coins from specific years with low mintage numbers, making them particularly rare. They look for minting errors, a slightly misaligned die, a double strike, or a flaw in the metal, that make a particular coin unique. The transition from French-only to bilingual coins offers a fascinating collecting theme, allowing one to trace the country's political evolution. A collector might seek to acquire a coin from the reign of every Belgian king, from Leopold I to Albert II, creating a numismatic portrait of the monarchy. The engravers themselves are also a source of fascination. The artistry of Joseph-Pierre Brempt on the first coins, or the work of later masters like Alphonse Michaud and Armand Bonnetin, is highly appreciated. Collectors admire the quality of the engraving, the majestic depiction of the Belgian lion, and the elegant composition of the designs. These coins are seen as small works of art, produced for the masses. Certain designs, like the iconic minor 50-centime piece from the mid-20th century, are beloved for their depiction of the common working man, a departure from the usual royal portraits and monograms. Ultimately, the story of the Belgian copper coin is the story of Belgium itself. It's a tale of independence, of linguistic identity, of enduring 2 world wars, and of embracing a new European future. These coins are not just pieces of copper, bronze, or zinc. They are artifacts that carry the weight of history, the pride of a nation, and the artistry of their creators. They remind us that even the smallest, most commonplace objects can have a rich and compelling story to tell if we only take a moment to look closely, and that, I think you'll agree, is quite interesting.